I would just like to welcome the GMD, our Group Managing Director, Dr. Olusegun Olasade. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. So we just get right into it.
Indeed, as I said, the global consulting outfit, TLFirst, has been around for over 30 years. Many of you, friends and partners, and some people who've heard about us and worked with us. I'm very pleased that we have our colleagues, some from the UK, some from Nigeria, who are going to contribute to our discussion this morning. The topic that's been put before us is just simple reflection on where we are. So today's program is actually focused on Nigeria. There will be other ones that will be more global. We have some global context within our discussion today. However, the conversation is just to look at Nigeria and reflect on where we are and where we are going in terms of a country, where we should focus on. So I'm aware that we've got a few people who yourselves have your thoughts about these issues we're discussing. So if it hasn't been mentioned already, feel free to contribute, feel free to write comments within the text, which in the course of the conversation, and then I would raise the colleagues who are sharing with us, who are contributing this morning themselves, people who are experienced. I was going to say we're all Nigerians, but we are all Nigerians, even though Dr. Charles Buckman originally is British, but he's as Nigerian, probably more Nigerian than anybody else. So quite glad that Dr. Charles Buckman is with us as a contributor. Mr. Soji Adeni.
God bless you.
Mr. Soji Adeni is in Nigeria, so quite happy that he's able to join us as well. I think Professor Mrs. Shola Adeshola, I'm just looking at the list, is with us as well. Join us from Oxford, and she'll share her perspectives. And then I think we have Honorable Leke Okpeodu as well. He's someone who's quite involved. I'm going to sort of give the list. Maybe I should just share my screen and I could show you the list of contributors that we have. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen for a moment and I'm going to use that. And then we have Mr. Tony Omomia, who is joining us from other part of the UK. Again, someone who is very knowledgeable and experienced with Nigerian activities and indeed consults in Nigeria. He's an expert in digital technology. I've asked him to sort of reflect on productivity as well. So we got all these to talk about. Each of the contributors will only speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll have questions and discussions. I hope one of my staff in Lagos or Abuja to monitor chat box so that we could get all the questions people are asking. So I sort of put this together very quickly. So pardon the design. It's not as pretty as my usual presentation would have been. And it's just to bring some global perspective to the discussion before we asked our first contributor to speak. And it's important when we look at Nigeria, because as we know, we're not in isolation to some of the issues around the world. And the prediction from IMF and the World Bank, one of my quotes, if many of you remember, has been, do not confuse wind with power. So tailwind is when the season favors you and everything seems to be going in the right direction. Businesses before COVID actually had just thought there were consistent growth in Nigeria, for example. It was 7% growth around the world. We had an average of about 6%. The emerging world was averaging, in some cases, 10% growth. The danger in that environment, that context, is it's easy for leaders and entrepreneurs and business leaders and political leaders to assume things were just going to go as fantastic as it's been until we had the shock of COVID. And that was why I said, when things are going well, you need to build your horsepower. Don't assume you're already strong enough to cope with headwinds. The first, obviously, was the COVID. And now we're moving off COVID. And in some cases, some people are still right into COVID, for example, when you look at China and some other countries. And as we were coming off COVID in the UK, we actually some of the government meeting I went yesterday, they're predicting a wave 5 of COVID to start in the next week or so. So you can see you're going to be seeing sudden rise again. There's still restrictions in some countries around the world, but in the main, many of us are moving off COVID. And then we got the Ukraine war that came up, and that caused another massive disruptions in production, for example, and supplies around the world. There was just an immediate cut of production because a big part of the world actually still rely on Russia for supplies. So obviously, once there's cut on limited supplies, there's shortages, and once there are global shortages, what do you have? Inflation just coming in from one direction. Now, at the same time, from another direction, you have interest rates rising all over the world, partly again because of the disruptions that we've had and we're still going through. And interest rates rising means cost of debts are rising. So for entrepreneurs and businesses, we're having to pay more. And now even for individuals, we're having to pay more. And once cost of debt rise and capital costs rise, what happens? Inflation, again, that's pushing that up. And then as capital costs rise, labor costs are rising, inflation. So everything is driving towards inflation. And to control inflation, many central banks in the world are trying to maintain a higher level of interest rate. So the days of sub-zero or just above 1% interest rates, even in Nigeria, that used to have about 25% at some point, going to single digits, was fantastic. But those days are gone for now. And you could see in the UK where we were going 0% interest rates, going up to 6% quite rapidly. And okay, in the UK, part of that was due to the disruption due to the election, but primarily it's still the same issue. Growth is slowing, interest rates are rising, and then in some countries we have recession. Actually, UK was predicted to be assessed to have been in recession last quarter, and still probably will be once the Bureau of Statistics measures that. In the case of Nigeria, we don't see recession. We see actually sustained growth. We're not looking at growth as it used to be around the, around the 7%, 7.5% we've seen in recent years, but we've seen the steady growth around the 3%, even though last year's growth was less than 3.7 that was anticipated, but above 3% steady growth we've seen for the last 7 quarters in Nigeria. The growth has been driven mainly by the non-oil sector, so you should know that, because we know that oil production has reduced globally and indeed around the world and indeed in Nigeria. So all of this is driving prices again. Poverty in Nigeria is pretty high. Unemployment rate is well above half of the population or the working population, and inflation is pretty high. They've tried to control inflation down below 20% in recent times, but it's still pretty high, higher than the rest of the world, but certainly big parts of the world, but still under control. But the good thing is there is steady growth. So where you have many countries tapering, and Nigeria continues to grow. And I remember a few years ago when we had the Nigeria versus South Africa, who is growing bigger, who's going to be the biggest country in Africa. Well, that was when growth were around 7-8%. Now, even South Africa, I think, had very near zero growth, is what was being predicted to have that. In terms of Africa, Nigeria maintains one of the biggest growth, but we still got the issues around politics and security. We got election coming up in a couple of months, the disruptions from that. We still got disruptions from the Niger Delta region, the theft of oil, and the security issues around there. And then we still got the massive Boko Haram issue that continues to plague the country. So I'm just going to finish with this looking ahead perspective when you bring all these together. Like I said, if you've got any questions on my contribution or my introduction, just note it down in the chat box. Colleagues will pick them up and then we'll read them as and when we have the time in between contributors coming up. So we got elections coming up from political side. We got the budget has been set at about 20 trillion. So I'll be interested to hear some thoughts around that from different people. 20 trillion naira. That's one of the highest, well, it's the highest we've ever seen. Is it achievable? Is it deliverable? Is it just trying to stick it in the air or hide your head in the sand? I'm not even sure why we're high, but I'd like to hear. Mr. Soji is very good with, but not just Nigerian global economics environment, but also the international world, as he's worked in many of our international development organizations. So it'll be interesting to know what his thoughts are when he gives his contribution about that budget, or maybe from Professor Shola, who also specializes in international business. But the interesting thing within that is that about 6.5 trillion in exact terms is for servicing of debts. Now, we know the debate and the arguments and people have had recently around high debts and when we were going for more and more debts from China. But imagine 6 trillion. Just a few years ago, the whole of the expenditure of Nigeria, Alton, was about 7 trillion. So imagine saying you're spending all of that just servicing debt, not paying back debt, just debt interest. And it's going to go higher as interest rate continue, global interest rate continue to increase. So that's the real shock, and how we can do that is interesting. In the appropriation bill, the base price for oil was set at $70 per barrel. Oil is currently trading around 80, I think it's about 80 last time I checked, or 85. It's between 80 and $90 per barrel. I remember a few years ago when we set the oil price at 120 per barrel because it was 150, and suddenly went down to 30, and we had that crisis and recession in Nigeria. So is 70 baseline an appropriate one? Again, I'd like to hear your thoughts if you're involved in this. I think the need to export more is important because of Forex. So we had just a few weeks ago, a pound trading at the secondary market, or black market as some people call it, at about 1,000 or over 1,000 naira. And it's still sort of hovering around that now, 940, last time I checked. But the argument for devaluation still remains. Have we even devalued already? So maybe we shouldn't even fool ourselves whether or not we devalued, because you can hardly get Forex now in Nigeria. A lot of international companies are pulling out because they can't get their money. And what's the point if you have to buy in the secondary market anyway? Infrastructure still remains very poor. It doesn't support development as it should. Again, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And then we've still got the issue around the 5th wave of COVID. So on security point, I already mentioned the impact of Boko Haram. It's been tackled. Hopefully it will get better as it's been predicted, but it's still there. Niger Delta is still not resolved in terms of security issues. The theft of oil and smuggling is reduced, but it's still quite high. I've got this final thought about other Putins. Nobody expected Putin to start the Ukraine war. Will there be other ones? The sounds being heard around the world and people testing the nuclear showing strength. So we've got all of that, and then the impact of that on social development. Again, when you talk about social development, again, I would love to hear maybe in Mrs. Soji's contribution, or Dr. Charles Buckman, who also specializes in that area of social development. So those are my immediate thoughts. So let's kickstart. I don't know who we're going to have first in the program, but should we bring on, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and bring up Professor Shola Adeshola, who just to give her thoughts and reflections, and then we bring in the others before we open up to questions. Over to you, ma'am. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Segun Olasode. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I thank you for the background that you have provided to set context. I think my topic this morning of contribution is to look at how businesses operating in Nigeria can upscale to global relevance. I mean, that topic itself is quite big, and for 5 minutes that I have, I will try and I think it's just going to be laying introduction to perhaps maybe other questions that can come from the participant. Now, we're looking at businesses, and this could involve both SMEs that want to expand their businesses globally, and it could also be maybe existing multinational corporations that are operating in Nigeria. Either way, we are looking at international entrepreneurship. And if we understand some of the policies that relate to international trade, we know that these include issues about trade policy that Nigeria has. It has to do with the political instability, and we have talked extensively about the current instability in the country. We are also looking at the aspect of governance and corruption that often discourages overseas businesses from trading with Nigeria, even though we have products, we have services. And also the part that we have the rising inflation, and it's not just in Nigeria, it's across the world. And so we have this affect obviously our currency, foreign exchange reserve, as well as the exchange rate that keeps fluctuating. But just to set the context, my focus is really how can those businesses, given the current economic recession that is going, the post-pandemic, and of course the challenge, the international competitiveness, how can the Nigerian SMEs, large organizations, continue to upscale what they're already doing to become more globally relevant? I mean, there are some statistics coming from IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, especially now with the recent data that we have from the United Nations on the population. So the demographic increase, and Africa is mentioned as one region in the world that is going to contribute to the global demographic upsurge. Now, the question that we need to ask immediately is, what is our resource capability even to address, because definitely Nigeria is one of those countries in the region of Africa that has been mentioned. So when we talk about demographic upsurge, what are those companies going to be looking to prepare ahead? By 2035, we are already talking about huge increase. Now, when we apply the triple bottom line ideas model, we look at companies that have it's like 3 tiers model. Okay, most of the companies, the large organizations, they tend to ignore those countries in the bottom level situation because of poverty levels. Those people are living beyond maybe £2, $1 a week, a day, according to the World Bank data. But when we're looking at the increase, the indicative increase of the United Nations, the question we need to begin to ask by those SMEs that want to maybe increase their global relevance is, what are they going to be doing in terms of products and services to meet the new increase of demographic upsurge in the next 30 years or so. But more importantly is even to begin to look at what we have already. It has been mentioned, of course, that there is business growth, especially in some areas, but also in non-oil sector. So the non-oil sector, when you look at the earnings capacity, it's still low when we look at the international data on that. And I want to focus on the non-oil products that Nigeria is exporting at the moment. And that means that these products, even though we have quite a bit of it, and there is a data actually in terms of goods that have been exported. So we have commodities like mineral, ships, cocoa, oilseed, edible fruit and nuts, tobacco, aircraft, and so on. But some of these products, actually, when you look at them, they are not globally competitive. And now, why did I say that? Because they haven't actually met what we call the international standard requirements. When you look at a product, kind of perishable products that have been exported and they want to trade internationally, you look at the standardization, you look at the labeling, you look at the description of those products, and you look at the certification that is required to make those products to be internationally competitive. Now, these are, and we know that within Nigeria, especially when it comes to those products, they have gone through a lot of issues. They are improving, but we still have a long way to go in terms of actually getting products certificated and approved domestically before they can even begin to export them internationally. And many of their food products, for example, have failed be exported to be trading at the international level, like for example in the UK, because they haven't actually certified, they are not certified on international standard. So that's just one example to look at the labeling, the standardization. And again, we have to look at the production process as well. So when you look at the production process, one of the challenges we are facing in Nigeria, obviously, is the infrastructure. So when we look at the water supply, when we look at electricity, the power, we know that many manufacturing companies, they are hindered because of power shortage and even water supply, and even overseas companies that are trading in manufacturing in Nigeria. This is one major area where our manufacturing output has declined. And now we're even moving into service, but even that service, when we talk about maybe digital entrepreneurship, which is becoming more relevant, and technology, we know that power is still a major issue, because unless you have a power, even when you have businesses online, it's still going to be a major issue. So one of the areas that, again, to encourage and to enable businesses to upscale for global relevance is the ability, the stability in power. And we know that this is a political agenda as well, because I mean, this topic has been going on for years, and still it seems that we are nowhere near addressing the power shortages and infrastructure. And if you look at it again, the supply chain in Nigeria in terms of logistics, moving goods from one country in Nigeria, even to the regional, maybe to Botswana, maybe to South Africa, maybe to Kenya or Ghana, we need proper infrastructure and logistics. So these are issues. So even without thinking about maybe the global north, but even intra and inter-regional trade and competition, we know that we are still faced with some of the challenges when it comes to our transportation and logistics. Now, look at more, maybe because of time, some of the kind of the strategic aspect that I would like us to look at in terms of what can businesses do to upscale. One is to look at their strategy of operation, okay? Because when you begin to expand your business outside of Nigeria, the way you do things in Nigeria definitely will differ from how you'll operate internationally. And then it might also require, and many businesses are already doing that, perhaps maybe more needs to be done with the support of the Nigerian government and the enablement, the ecosystem in Nigeria, in terms of actually helping them to source for overseas alliances, maybe joint venture. So some of the products, perhaps because of manufacturing processes, because of power shortage and water supply, it could be that some of these businesses, if we have maybe overseas research and laboratory, and I'm talking from an academic that is working with Nigerian universities, when a lot of these academics have research, that they actually want to take to the industry, but for one reason or another, because of one, maybe there's a lack of energy, capacity is a problem, they are unable to even to get their research, to turn it into products that can meet societal needs. Now, that's an important issue that, again, I think is important, because if we say that oil and gas is going to deplete in the next few years, and we are thinking of alternative energy and even beyond the natural resources into maybe knowledge-based economy, I mean, obviously wind, how we can make use of our university, and to bridge the gap between the industry, so the SMEs in Nigeria, the businesses, and also universities, so that a lot of the research can actually be applied in the context of meeting local needs and requirements. So addressing the upscale for global relevance, we know that many SMEs, many large organizations in Nigeria that want to operate globally, we also need to make sure that they are somehow have processes and systems in place to comply with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So depending on the nature of their businesses, obviously, if they are operating maybe in waste, for example, waste production, or maybe they're operating in other service area, there's some area that they need to make sure that their system will comply with, for example, maybe it's water, maybe it's clean technology, maybe it's poverty eradication. To what extent are they contributing to that? And it could also be that if they want to expand, how are they forging alliances? So we look at some of the aspects of the Sustainable Development Goals, actually strengthen, trying to forge alliances and joint venture, again, to kind of fortify and to help organizations to share best practices. The other thing I want to mention here is about actually looking inwardly within our SMEs and large organizations in Nigeria in terms of their processes, their governance, transparency, and accountability. Because when you are dealing with overseas businesses, they want to make sure that the business we are dealing with have proper processes in place in terms of equity. So how, and again, this is an issue because it is something that is affecting businesses in Nigeria. Okay, the way we do things in Nigeria, this is the way we operate. But when you are going outside, there are some things that you have to benchmark against international standard. So the question is, to what extent are we ready to actually begin to amend our internal processes and systems, and even the culture of doing business? Because when you look at the World Bank doing business in Nigeria, there are some basic categories. For example, how long does it take to register a business in Nigeria? It takes, I mean, it's improving now with the corporate affairs, but before it used to take maybe months, but that's timing is reducing. But more also is the issue about maybe intellectual property. So if the business, if they're operating in technology management, technology development, that may require maybe an area of licensing, for example. What is the process in Nigeria to actually enable ease of registering for patent, for example, in Nigeria? This is an issue that I'm dealing with already in terms of research. Actually, where is the data? How do we go about it? Is it ready-made? How long does it take to register maybe copyright, to register trademark in Nigeria, so that at least my business can be protected from being copied by maybe a rival organization in Nigeria? So we're looking at some basic requirement that is needed to help our businesses. Then I'll finish with this in terms of, which is still an extension of the standardization. When we look at our design, our packaging, our labeling, our description of products, what are we doing to improve on that, to measure against international standard? I mean, global relevance, meaning that we are actually addressing global challenges, and global challenges both domestically, but also looking outside. I mean, if we look at the Nigerian context from education perspective, we are not just educating Nigerians, we are educating people that are coming to Nigeria to come and undertake their study in the Nigerian context. Some of them may be coming from even outside of Africa, because maybe they are doing research that relates to African culture and they want to come to Nigerian University. Now, again, as businesses, how do we ensure that we are actually stretching beyond our border, have diversified participation of clients, customers, employees? I know this is a big area, but when we look at ethnicity, religion, and politics in Nigeria, the issue of diversity is also very important when we're looking at our workforce participation and workforce management. So it is a big issue, like I said, but I think hopefully I'm just giving some pointers to, again, maybe open up the debate and questions as we progress in this conversation. And I just want to finish by saying that looking forward, given that we have rising security issues in Nigeria, the terrorist attack in Nigeria, the conflict that is happening in Nigeria, these are not helping international trade at all. So the only way that we can begin to make ourselves more relevant globally is for the government, for peace to start with, return back to Nigeria, but also for individual businesses to actually do inward assessment of their processes, how they do business with international, how they can forge better alliance, strategic alliances and joint venture, again, through maybe research, it could be through licensing or maybe franchising, depends on the nature of the business. But I think we have to do it inwardly first, because if we are waiting for the government to do everything, it might take us another 30 years. So I think there's a need for individual businesses to do a self-assessment of how they are doing business, their processes and their system to comply, not just to national and local standard, but to measure against international standard. And above all, to make sure that as an international business, we are also embracing diversity and inclusivity in our businesses. So I'll stop for now while we open up for other speakers to talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. It's very fantastic and fascinating to hear from you. Intellectual resource all the way from Oxford. This is something that we do not, I'm sure participants do not take for granted, to give that time for this. And you've said quite a lot, and I think we could actually have a separate session on doing business, upscaling business, Nigerian businesses for global relevance. And I'm beginning to think another webinar coming up on that area already. I've written that down. Because in my introduction, I said the need to improve our Forex, given the context that I gave at the beginning. I saw comments against, and the limitation in terms of our standard, and you cannot compete effectively, like you said, if standards are poor, and if you cannot work within the processes, governance, and accountability that is expected at that level. And you covered many other things I don't want to repeat, but I think they're just awesome. One thing for me that you said that is, I think people can take, and I think we need to even say this in a wider groups of people, is that opportunity for joint venture. So if action is limited because of standards and processes and digital technology, which we're very good at in Nigeria, is limited because of infrastructure, how can Nigerian businesses partner with other people, other businesses outside of Nigeria with better infrastructure, and then collaborate in the way to export their business? I think that's quite helpful, and it's something that I think we're going to explore further later, and people may have questions later on. I think I want to move on to, let me see, should we bring Mr. Soji up to share his perspectives, and then after that we'll bring Mr. Omomia up to share his perspective, and then we'll bring Mr. Okpeldu to share his thoughts around the political side, and then we'll finish up with Dr. Charles Buckman, if that's okay, if you're not in a rush to leave. So let me look for Mr. Adeniyi, and if you can switch on your video so we can spotlight you, and then we'll give it over to you. Over to you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Dr. Olasade, my mentor and big brother, for all that you've been doing in Nigeria in particular, and of course, your impact around the world with what you do with First Leadership Academy. I feel highly privileged to be considered a faculty in this highly esteemed institution. So thank you, sir, for everything that you do. And thanks for asking me to share my thoughts around this issue of repositioning business strategies. I just have 5 minutes. Just like Shola said, it's not enough time to make any clear impact, obviously, but I will try my best. A brief introduction, and then I'll introduce what I call the 4P4R model, which I believe it's probably one option that leaders and businesses can consider in a time like this. Then I would conclude. So I have 5 minutes. Hopefully I'll be able to do this. My introduction just got to do with a lot that Dr. Olasade and Dr. Olushola have said earlier in the day. Nigeria is a country in transition. Everything is transiting in the next couple of months. We hopefully will get a new president. We hopefully also would have an opportunity to redefine some of the things that would eventually take us to where we hope to be. So I hope that our optimism in the next couple of months will transit into a place where, as a nation, we can be proud that we made the right choices. At this point, I think we're changing. We just transited our currency, so we'll have new currency come 2023. We will have hopefully a new president come 2023. Ease of doing business, like Professor Olushola has said, is in transition. We have human capital challenges. We're still 104 out of 168 countries around the world in terms of human capital. And quite recently, people are talking about how people are moving en masse out of the country. The health sector is feeling, the tech sector is feeling it, the banking sector is, and over more challenges that are associated with the move from where we are to where we hope to be. Even though some of these things are seen as challenges, I rather want to look at them as opportunities. Opportunities for businesses to expand, opportunities for businesses to connect with like-minded people, opportunities for individuals to expand their scope of influence across nations and across boundaries. So these are my thoughts in terms of the transition changes. Africa's transition is also hinged on the Africa Free Trade Zone, a market of over 1 billion people in a compact of over 8 countries. Is also a transition that we need to manage very well. But what's the 4R model that I advocating for? It's nothing new. It's what people like Professor Olasode have been teaching us over the years on the element of strategic planning and the key elements that can make a difference between what we do now and what we see as results. So the 4P is 4P for results, and you would see what the 4P is. The 4P is the purpose, the plan, partnership, and products that we can propose, we can put in context going forward in 2023. Like I said, everything about Nigeria is about change. We are actually in real transition, and it could change positively or negatively depending on how you position yourself. And that's where the issue of purpose comes in. Purpose is not something that you just sit and say, oh, God asked me to do this, or the pastor says I will succeed if I try this. It is something that you need to sit back and align and set the sail carefully to ensure that whatever it is that happens, whether there is storms in life, because you have clarity in terms of purpose, then it is possible for you to move in the direction that you want to do. And this applies to business leaders as well as to businesses and micro businesses, if you ask me, because some of us are not very clear about our purpose. We're often very confused because of the rapidly changing situation in Nigeria in particular, because of some challenges that we already know in Nigeria. For me, I see them mostly as opportunities. People say it's dangerous, it's difficult. I work all around the country. I traveled yesterday 5 hours from Gombe through Potiskum to Damaturu, and I'm on the road and I see things that are happening around the road. I see a lot of opportunities. I see green in places that are supposed to be desert. I see millions of people walking through the night, and I see opportunities in people tapping into those areas that seems to be relatively unsafe and difficult, but with clarity, I think they can do a lot better. So I think we can begin to look there, but everything boils down to the second planning to know what to do, planning to know what works and what does not work, using data creatively, getting surveys that would give you what is needed. I mean, there's no point in planning when you don't have the data that would help you. Don't tell me that Nigeria does not have data. Create your own data, or be the supplier of data if that is going to be the product or service that you need to render. Each time people ask me what's the percentage of this, I said, what you do it. I started a survey a couple of years back. Just last month, the Minister of Education picked on the survey results and shared it with the Federal Executive Council. A policy change was made. If I didn't start that effort in 2013, 2014, 5 years down the line, we probably wouldn't have that policy change because there was no data when I started. We had to start digging out the data and producing it. So you have to be the change you wish to see. The next thing is partnerships. This is a very strong result-oriented option that we have. But over the years, we have failed in this area. Majority of Nigerians don't want to partner with other people because we want to do it alone. I feel very privileged each time a prof invites me to be a faculty. Ironically, work with involved, but he calls me in several times, even when he has projects outside of Nigeria, and he says, please come do this with me. And that's partnership. That's his strength. Look at him bringing in and the rest of them. That's what partnership means. A lot of us fail because we don't want to partner with other people, or because they are not. But if you want people to trust you, you have to demonstrate. You have to demonstrate collaboration. You have to demonstrate effective business ethics. You have to think win-win. and that will make the difference. I mean, just last week, IB has signing up new partnership agreement with one of the biggest Amazon. I mean, what else can you imagine? The dollar companies are signing partnership agreements, and then you don't want to partner with other people in order to take the growth. And if you have done all of these and you don't have the fourth P, which is the product, then trust me, you may not be moving anywhere. You may have a lot of energy and that you are expelling at a particular location, but you might not have movements, because products has to be a product of research. Services have to be a product of research. You have to know what people need. I mean, Professor Oloshala talked a lot about all the things that are lacking. What are you doing about that? What can your company do about that? How can your company reposition itself? How can your company have multiple lines of engagement? How can you have backward integration? If you're in agriculture, can you produce what you're servicing? Or if you're in services, can you be your own supplier? And all that needs to be thought through if you must make the transition from, to use the language, consumption to production. So these are areas that we can make changes to if we must make a difference in the year 2023. Year 2023 is going to be a year that will be half gone before we knew it, because by the time elections come in February, transition comes in May, budget comes in June, before you know it, half of the year is gone. So what's your strategy? How are you going to hold on to what you have now and expand with other people and partner with the right kind of people? How are you going to change the languages that people want to listen to? And how are you going to get the results that you want to get that will transit you from where you had to where you want to go? Remember that there will always be unintended results, both positive and negative, in what you do. Your assumption in your businesses when you start is not what it is if you don't do the necessary things. Leadership is not a status. It is leading in itself, which is the verb. So you need to continuously do what you need to do as a business leader, as a leader in your subsector, as an aspiring leader in your sector. You must change your assumptions that the businesses were based on at the time at which you started them for the things that you want to see coming forward. How are you going to sustain results that are giving you the kind of output that you need? How are you going to make the changes that will turn you into, the mega business that you want to be, following the model that Professor Oloshala outlined earlier in the day? So I think these are the things that we need to do if we must see the 2023 that addresses every element of our outstanding positioning in 2022. Post-COVID, post-recession, whatever it is that we are seeing ourselves in, 2023 must be better, but you need to follow the 4P for R model. It's probably a good starting point. In conclusion, I'd like to again thank everyone for listening. You can reach out to me if you want a bit more in-depth into the 4P for R model and how we can work together. Thank you very much, Dr. Asade, and it's really a pleasure to be here this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That sense of urgency that you, if you can leave your video on just for 2 seconds, the sense of urgency that you identified, and people forget about that you got the transition, the election, and then you move from that to the handover and then the budget. I remember the last election, I think we didn't get the budget till about July, and then we got funds released in August, and it's still the same. I think it's important.
Yes, Prof, it was August. And we didn't get the ministers until the following year.
And we didn't get ministers at all. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So thanks very much. Very insightful. And one thing Professor Adeshola said that you also emphasized in your presentation, 2 overlaps there. One around partnerships and collaboration. I know Professor Adeshola is a professor of international business, and she does lectures this every day in Oxford. But the way you sort of explain some of what is wrong with people, that they don't want to partner because they want to be themselves and give an example. So that session, I think both of you have said, these are just highlights. We need to have another big session on how, what Professor Adeshola called upscaling for global relevance, and the need for partnerships and collaboration, and what you also said at the beginning, product improvement. So I'm beginning to shape a session, maybe early in the new year, or after the election for this will just for CEOs and MDs. But I think it's very insightful, like some people have said. So thank you very much for that. I want to bring in Mr. Momia, who's a digital technology person. Again, another part of the UK and does a lot of businesses in Nigeria, understands the value of technology. Professor Shola said at the beginning, that is a growing area in Nigeria. So we need to develop it, but we've got the challenge of infrastructure limiting that development. I don't know how we're going to do it. I'll hand over to Mr. Momia, who's going to give us his own contribution or thoughts for a few minutes. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Olu Olaside. Thank you for inviting me to talk about digital technologies and productivity, how Nigeria can leverage digital technologies and in transforming businesses in Nigeria. Professor Shola Adesola talked about those challenges that we face in terms of doing business in Nigeria and how we can leverage digital technology. Across the world, in the Western world, digital technology has become a disruptive economy around the globe, and where organizations use digital transformation to leverage their businesses. So digital transformation defines the whole journey of rethinking how organization uses technology, people, and processes to change business performance. And the two key words in what I'm discussing is technology, digital technologies, and productivity. The economists have defined productivity as a ratio between output and input, and that is measured in value added, and how labor help this input, and workers and employees and proprietors can leverage digital technology in order to increase their productivity. What I could see is Nigeria is not leveraging digital technology as a disruptive economy, because through digital economy, it's considered as the main driver for growth in both developed and developing countries. And I will talk about digital transformation as 4 key or 5 key elements in digital transformation for organizations to leverage. You talk about strategy, the people who actually produce services, and then you talk about customer and the technology and the culture and the organization. All these elements tends to help in digital transformation. When you talk about organization, you have the partnership and the ecosystem. Professor Adesola discussed about those disadvantages in terms of doing business in Nigeria. If the Nigeria businesses, including private and public sectors, the government, can leverage digital transformation or digital technology to move the economy forward. Because during the COVID and when we were in lockdown in the UK, the government did not stop. We leveraged digital technology to work from home and collaborate. Organizations should use digital technology for partnership and ecosystem. This will drive businesses and drive productivity. The nation needs to digitize their core IT systems and then ensure that these services can be developed and deployed for their customers. And then because you have customers that have interactions and marketing channels to deliver your services, you need to have this good customer experience using this technology and getting your customer involved in your product and product development. So for the strategic role that digital transformation plays, you can use the existing a formulated digital technology to develop your services. You can document and communicate this strategy to your customers or to your business partner. The availability of sufficient resources. The resources are bound in Nigeria, and then we can also use those resources to deliver this technology. and also exploiting and evaluating the new trend within technology. These new trends, like I've reiterated, artificial intelligence, robotic automation, machine learning, and then the mobile technology. We have mobile technology applications are developed for mobile devices, and this can be leveraged for anywhere in the world, and users who are leveraging your services can use mobile technology to access those services. And then how will digital technology enhances productivity through education and development of new skills, flexibility, and working arrangements, Speaker?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. It builds upon some of the comments we heard earlier with it. So we know that digital technology is an area of growth. We also know that we need that to support that development and what Professor Adeshola said earlier about market competitiveness and global relevance. The questions, the one or two questions relating to that, how, given the need for upskilling, how can people benefit from that and the need for upskill? If we have time, we can pick that up after Dr. Buckman's contribution. But that need to digitize and become agile that you've said, I think is important. It improves efficiency, like you said, and the needs for upskill. I have a question about AI in Nigeria, how that can work. But again, whether the environment enables use of artificial intelligence and enables advancement of technology as it should. But some of the questions, quite a lot of questions, we have just 11 minutes to go, that we may not answer all of it now. My staff will write them all down. We get some answers and we send them out with the link to the video of today's session and the presentation that somebody has asked for afterwards. I want to bring Dr. Buckman in just for 5 minutes. Thank you so much. You can see that Mr. Omomia is a very techy person. He should have went into the level that was supposed to be like. I think he was adding some terms that even like, it's my dictionary. I need to understand this. That's fantastic. We need to hear that. And
excellent.
We need to have another session on that digital technologies. All this we put together are just high-level sessions. We need to have a drill down on technology.
No, it was too much, but the Lord is with us. Well, good morning, everybody. It's like, I greet you all from Milton Keynes in England. Dr. Shola Adesola, God bless you, with a remarkable presentation. But the most important thing is what I'm going to talk about in the next 4 minutes or so. It's simple, very simple. These government ideas, these deep thoughts and deep expressions can only work when you have effective relationship. Because in our culture, in Africa, as you all know, we've been culturally and traditionally motivated so much. There's so many factors, but I bring it down to one thing. For anything to work effectively, it's relationship. You have no business being in business without relationship. You have no business being in business without relationship. I came for what we are doing, something that I call strategic alliance. I'm sure you've all heard it. It is so important that we create an atmosphere where we can relate to people to further our businesses, to be productive, to be effective. People matter. People matter. But in order to build a strong business, a strong nation, a strong whatever we are building, we need to understand these few points. And this is an elaborate session, but I just want to bring it down to some bite-sized thoughts so that we can all think about it. You see, to develop strategic alliances, you've got to realize that we've got to have a conviction that we are building for the nation. But it's got to be conviction. You've got to be convicted. I'm not talking about spiritual conviction, but in your heart of hearts, you know that whatever I'm doing, for it to last, I need relationships. People matter. Now, relationships are so vital for any worthy cause, in which I love Dr. Shola's presentation. I love my brother Anthony's presentation. But it's people, and we've got to realize that at this moment in time, Africa is in transition, and I'm happy about that. We are transiting, but we still have some cultural and traditional values, things that are prohibiting our progress. So let's go through the points quickly. Number one, if you want to involve people in any endeavor, there ought to be mutual respect, no tribalism, not they're from the north, they're from the south. No, you respect them because we need them. You respect them. So mutual respect is number one. Number two, trust and integrity. That's what establishes a strategic alliance. It's not just for what you're going to get, but it's also for what we're going to give to each other. The next one is mutual benefit. And that's the most important aspect. When people understand what you're doing, what we want to bring across, and they know that it will benefit them, believe you me, they will run helter-skelter. For us to improve and develop from where we are now, going forward, post-COVID, post-everything, we need to follow these principles. People matter. Social capital there's nothing as strong as social capital, because the people you're going to work with, they need to understand you. And so social capital is vital. Look up how we can use social capital. And that's what I want to conclude with. Relationship among people who live and work in a particular society. Through relationship, that's what creates the enabling environment for us to progress. And so let's build strong relationships. Let's develop strategic alliances. Let's have partnerships, strong partnerships with these values: mutual respect, trust, and integrity, and most importantly, mutual benefit. And that's my presentation for today, as we've heard so much. I want to thank you all for this time, but we can talk at length behind the scenes or but it is so vital we build strategic alliances.
Thank you.
Not political, not that's how we develop. And thank you for your moments. Thank you, Dr. Olasade.
At the meeting, but thank you very much for your contribution. Like I said, we'll send all the answers to the questions around. We ask the contributors to come and answer these questions. Ms. Soji is probably in transit now. Raymond, thanks for your comment. Said, thanks for your comment. I think we just use this time to say it's been a fantastic opportunity to interact with you. We will try and do a drill down after this to pick up some of these issues separately. I think I want to pull together that session on upscaling our product and service lines to international standards and combining that with partnership, collaboration, and relationships. So maybe just bring the three of you into one global session for CEOs to look at that. And then we have a separate one for chief executives on technology. And I think we want to just focus on digital technology in a way that's a fast growing area, in a way that would have that. So I'm not going to use up the last 2 minutes because people have to go and start another meeting in a minute. So I just want to say thank you. And we didn't have someone asking, how do I get buy-in? Okay, so there's some more questions we're going to answer later.